Joe Budden has never been afraid to say something that sets the internet on fire, but this time he picked a target who was fully prepared to answer back. When he started talking about Latto's new album and casually slid in the idea that Drake might be behind some of her bars, he turned what could have been a normal review into a full-blown debate about ghostwriting, influence, and respect in hip-hop. For a lot of people, it felt like he wasn't just critiquing a song, he was questioning a woman's pen in a way that hit a nerve. And for Latto, who has worked for years to be seen as a real rapper and not just a viral personality, there was no way she was going to sit quiet and let that narrative cook unchecked. The whole thing really kicked off when Joe sat down on his podcast to break down Latto's new project. As usual, he and the crew were running through standout tracks, favorite moments, and things that didn't land for them. When Hostage came up, Joe pointed out how much the flow and the melodic pockets reminded him of something Drake would do. He talked about the way the vocal delivery, the emotional tone, and even some of the bar patterns felt like they could have come straight off a Drake project. At first, it sounded like a normal comparison. Rappers get compared to other rappers every day, but then he pushed it a little further and started hinting that maybe this was deeper than just influence. That's where the tone shifted. Instead of simply saying, "This sounds Drake-inspired," Joe implied that there might be some reference track energy going on, or that Drake could have had a more direct hand in how the record was put together. He also brought up how, on an earlier intro, fans had already been saying Latto sounded like Drake, and joking that he must have written it. So now, with this new album, he suggested it was starting to feel like a pattern. In the way he told it, there was a whole storyline where Latto's big cinematic intros are secretly Drake-coded, right down to the structures and flows, in a vacuum. That might sound like typical podcast speculation, nothing more. But you cannot attach the words Drake and ghostwriting to a conversation and then act surprised when it explodes. Drake has lived through years of discourse about reference tracks and collaborative writing. Every time his name gets connected to someone else's pen, the old debates about authenticity, co-writers, and what it really means to write your own verses come rushing back. So when Joe plugged Latto into that ecosystem, he was never just talking about one song. He was activating a whole history of suspicion that surrounds Drake and ghostwriting, and dragging Latto into the middle of it. Latto understood that better than anyone, and she responded in a way that was both simple and surgical. She didn't go on a rant. She didn't jump on a live stream and scream into the phone about how everybody's hating. Instead, she posted a single photo, a whiteboard covered in handwritten lyrics to Hostage, with a clear timestamp showing the date and time those words were written. No essay, no over-explaining, just her handwriting and Joe Budden's username tagged in the caption. It was one of those responses where the silence around it said more than any 1,000-word caption ever could. That whiteboard picture instantly changed the energy of the conversation. Before the post, the narrative was built on a lot of what if, and it kind of sounds like. After the post, you had an artist showing what looked like a real moment from her writing process. For casual fans, the message was straightforward. This is my song. These are my lyrics. And I wrote them myself. For people who were already paying attention, it was also a strategic move. Latto didn't just say she writes, she showed evidence of the work in her own handwriting, long before the podcast drama. What makes all of this even more layered is that Latto had already addressed the Drake rumors in her music long before this particular clip from Joe's show went viral. On her intro track, she drops that now famous line where she basically says they think Crody wrote it and calls that a compliment. With one bar, she acknowledged the talk, flipped it into something playful, and made it sound like she's not bothered at all by people comparing her pen to Drake's. She doesn't act like she's running from the comparison. She treats it like a flex. If listeners think her writing is on the level of one of the biggest artists in the world, that says something about how sharp they think her verses are. There's a difference between fans making jokes about how this sounds like Drake and a major hip-hop voice publicly suggesting that a woman's best work might secretly be coming from a man behind the scenes. That's where the problem lies for a lot of people. In hip-hop, especially, your pen is tied directly to your identity, your value, and your respect. When someone hints that your best work belongs to someone else, it cuts deeper than just a casual observation about style. Calls your entire credibility into question, especially if you are someone who raps about your real life and wears your authenticity proudly. There is also no way to separate this from the gender dynamics in rap. Women have had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously as writers. When a male rapper drops a polished, introspective record with clean cadences and clever writing, people usually give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he wrote it himself, unless there is undeniable proof that he didn't. When a woman does it, you don't have to wait long before somebody says, "Okay, but who really wrote that?" Those double standards are baked into the culture, and whether Joe meant to or not, his comments poured gasoline on that fire in Latto's case. The way Latto handled it, though, showed exactly why she's managed to build the career she has. She didn't run, she didn't beg for approval, and she didn't hide behind a team statement. She answered with receipts and let everybody else argue about what those receipts meant. You can debate how strong that proof is if you want to, but you cannot say she just stayed quiet and let the allegation float around her name with no response. She went straight to the root of the issue. If you're going to talk about who wrote Hostage, here's a picture of where those lyrics live before they ever hit a mic. This whole moment also reveals how weird the line between influence and ghostwriting has become in modern rap. It is completely normal for artists to borrow flows, melodic patterns, structural ideas, and even full song formats from one another. If Latto makes an intro that feels dramatic, introspective, and melodic, in a way that reminds people of a Drake album opener, that alone doesn't prove anything about who wrote it. It just proves she's working in a space that Drake helped popularize. The jump from "this sounds inspired by" to "this must have been written by" is where things go off the rails. From Joe's side, he was doing what he always does, connecting dots, exaggerating for entertainment, and leaning into the kind of wild speculation that keeps his audience engaged. He is good at that. He knows how to say something just open-ended enough that fans will argue about it for days. There's a difference between a take that stays in the lane of musical comparison and a take that gives people ammunition to say, "See, even Joe thinks she's not really writing like that." In a culture that still puts so much weight on the idea of writing your own material, that difference matters. Another thing worth looking at is the way these narratives spread now. Joe's original comments happened in the middle of a long podcast episode. Plenty of listeners heard the whole thing, with context and jokes and back and forth. But the majority of the internet did not experience it that way. They saw clips chopped down to a few seconds, with captions that emphasized the most explosive part, that Drake might be writing for Latto, or that he might have done reference tracks for her intros. Once those clips hit social media, the nuance disappears, and the headline becomes the whole story. For Latto, that shift in perception could be dangerous if left alone. She has built a lane as someone who can make hits, talk her talk, and still tap into vulnerable, honest storytelling. If enough people start believing that a chunk of that storytelling isn't really hers, it doesn't just hurt her ego, it undercuts the entire brand she's created. That's why her response was so quick, so focused, and so visual. She needed something that could travel just as fast as the clip of Joe talking, and the whiteboard photo did exactly that. There's also a personal element buried inside all this that fans can feel even if it isn't always said directly. Latto has been very open about her grind, her family, her relationships, and the pressure she faces as a woman in a male-dominated field. Her music reflects those experiences. If people start claiming that these words, these stories and these perspectives are actually coming from someone else, it erases a part of her journey. It makes it sound like she is just a mouthpiece delivering lines crafted by a man in the background, which is a narrative that has been used to undermine women across genres for decades. On Drake's side, this entire conversation probably feels like familiar territory. He has been in the middle of ghostwriting talk for years, and at this point, most fans have already decided how they feel about that. Some people believe great music is great music and do not care how many writers were in the room. Others believe that if you want to stand on a greatest rapper pedestal, you need to write every bar yourself, or at least be honest about who helped. Dragging Latto into that storm essentially recycles an old debate and transfers the baggage onto her shoulders, even though she is the one showing physical proof of her own process. The fan reaction has reflected all of these layers. A portion of listeners agreed with Joe's original take and said that they too heard Drake's influence all over certain parts of Latto's album. Another group firmly sided with Latto, praising her for pulling out the whiteboard and calling Joe out just by tagging him. And then there's the middle group, the people who say, look, a lot of artists blend styles now. That doesn't automatically mean someone else wrote the song. It might just mean we all live in the same musical universe and are drinking from the same well of ideas. If there's one clear lesson in this whole saga, it's that artists in 2026 have to be ready to protect their story in real time. It is no longer enough to rely on the music alone to speak for you, because narratives move faster than albums. A single suggestion tossed out on a podcast can become the way half the internet talks about you within a week. Latto reacted like someone who understands that reality. She didn't wait for a big interview or a planned rollout moment to address it. She went straight to the source of the conversation and answered in a single image that people could screenshot, share, and remember. For Joe. This situation is another reminder that his words carry far more weight now than they did when he was just tweeting opinions into the void. He's not a bystander in hip-hop media anymore. He's one of the main characters. When he speculates, artists hear it, fans run with it, and blogs frame articles around it. That doesn't mean he has to stop being honest or stop drawing bold comparisons, but it does mean there is a line between entertaining commentary and planting a seed that can damage someone's reputation without solid backing. In the long term, this moment will probably become a part of Latto's origin story for this phase of her career. When people look back at this era, they will remember the pregnancy reveal, the album, the introspective records, and the way she had to step up and defend her pen. They will remember that when a powerful voice suggested Drake might be writing for her, she did not fold or shrink. She laughed, turned the rumor into a bar, posted receipts, and kept it moving. It is the kind of response that fits exactly with the confident, unbothered persona she has been building for years. What happens next is partly up to her and partly up to the audience. If she keeps dropping strong records, keeps telling her story, and keeps showing the same level of control over her image, this whole episode might end up looking less like a stain and more like a test she passed. For Joe, it will be one more moment people bring up when they talk about the times his commentary crossed from sharp critique into controversy. For Drake, it is yet another reminder that his influence is so big, people see his shadow even in places where he is not actually standing. At the end of the day, the question isn't, could Drake write for Latto? The real question is, why so many people are so quick to assume that a woman operating at a high level must have a man secretly holding the pen behind her? Latto has made it clear she hears the comparisons, she understands the rumors, and she is not scared of them. If anything, she's willing to turn them into punchlines and plot points. But she is also willing to draw the line and say, this is my work, and I'll show you if I have to. That combination of confidence and proof is exactly what makes this moment so powerful. For anyone paying attention, this situation is bigger than just one song or one podcast rant. It is about who gets to own their story, whose pen gets doubted first, and how quickly speculation can become truth if nobody pushes back. Latto pushed back, and she did it in a way that felt smart, collected, and fully in character. Whether people choose to accept that or not says more about them than it does about her.